All right, we're about to dive into a chain of events so bizarre it almost sounds like fiction. This is the story of how one of the biggest tragedies in human history, the Black Death, didn't just mark the end of an era, it actually completely by accident created the modern world. And believe it or not, it all kicks off with a really strange question. How on earth did a papal decree about cats lead to the Renaissance and, our modern world? Sounds impossible, right? Well, let's dig in. Okay, so to really get this, you've got to picture 14th century Europe. And I mean, this was a time when superstition wasn't just some fringe belief, it was basically the law of the land. The one and only source for what was true, it all came from one place, the church. Yeah, forget about things like scientific inquiry or, healthy debate. No. In this world, whatever the Pope said was treated as absolute divine truth. End of story. So when a crisis struck, a famine, a flood, a terrible disease, people weren't looking for a natural cause. They were looking to the church for a supernatural explanation. And this, right here, is where one single decision changes, well, everything. Pope Gregory IX issues this fateful decree, and it basically says that demons were using animals, especially cats, to talk with witches. So his solution? It was terrifyingly simple. If you want to fight the devil, you've got to kill the cats. I mean, just try to wrap your head around the scale of this. We're not talking about a brief panic. For 100 years, killing a cat was considered a holy duty. Can you imagine? Across all of Europe, the cat population was hunted down almost to the point of extinction. A single superstition, enforced for generations, had just completely rewired the continent's ecosystem. And as you can probably guess, this one superstitious act had absolutely devastating and totally unintended consequences. By getting rid of the #1 predator of rodents, Europe had just set the stage for an ecological disaster that nobody, and I mean nobody, saw coming. It was a tragic, fatal chain reaction. You can see it right here. First, no more cats to hunt them. So what happens, the black rat population just explodes. And these rats? They were crawling with fleas. And those fleas were carrying a super deadly bacterium, Yersinia pestis. You know it as the bubonic plague. The result was catastrophic doesn't even begin to cover it. In just 4 short years, the Black Death wiped out up to 200 million people. Let that sink in for a second. That's an estimated 60% of Europe's entire population. Gone. Entire towns just vanished. The very fabric of society was literally torn to shreds.
So the plague is just raging across the continent. It doesn't care if you're rich or poor, a priest or a peasant. It killed everyone. And the church? Well, the church had no answers. None. Prayers weren't working. And in all that desperation and all that fear, people started looking for someone to blame. They needed a scapegoat.
And that's when a really dangerous observation began to spread like wildfire. People started noticing that Jewish communities, which often lived in separate quarters, seemed to be dying at a much lower rate. Now, instead of looking for a logical reason, this simple fact got twisted into a deadly accusation. The real reason, of course, had nothing to do with conspiracy. It was simple hygiene. Jewish laws and cultural traditions have long emphasized cleanliness, which naturally meant fewer rats and fewer fleas. Meanwhile, much of medieval Europe was, let's just say, incredibly unsanitary. It was the perfect breeding ground for the plague. But, in that climate of pure terror, reason just didn't matter. A vicious conspiracy theories started to take hold, that Jewish people were deliberately poisoning Christian wells. And then fake confessions, like this one, extracted under the most brutal torture. They were published and spread everywhere, sealing the fate of thousands upon thousands of innocent people. The backlash was immediate, and it was horrific. A wave of violent massacres, called pogroms, swept across the continent. In the end, more than 550 entire Jewish communities were attacked and burned to the ground. Just gone. The scale of this violence is it's hard to even comprehend. In one city alone, the city of Mainz, 6,000 Jewish people were murdered. In another, Strasbourg, 2,000 men, women, and children were rounded up and burned alive. When all was said and done, it's estimated that over 100,000 Jewish people were murdered, blamed for a plague that was, ironically, unleashed by a pope's superstition about cats. It's just
a devastating, tragic irony.
And yet, out of all this unimaginable horror, something completely unexpected began to rise from the ashes. See, the Black Death didn't just kill millions of people. It killed the old world itself. The very foundations of medieval society, its economy, its power structures, its core beliefs, were shattered. And that paved the way for a revolution. I mean, the transformation was just profound. You can think of it as a before and after. Before the plague, you had a huge labor force with basically no power. After, labor was scarce and suddenly workers were empowered. Before, the church was the only source of truth. After, its authority was completely broken, and people started looking to science and reason for answers.
So this massive loss of life created a huge power vacuum. With so many workers gone, the peasants who survived could suddenly demand higher wages, more rights, more freedom. It completely shattered the old feudal system. And at the exact same time, faith in the church just crumbled when people saw that priests were dying just as easily as they were. This created a new thirst for knowledge. And because there was a desperate shortage of scribes to copy books, it led to one of the most important inventions in human history, the printing press.
So, in one of history's most bizarre twists, this unbelievable tragedy actually became the engine for progress. The plague basically hit the reset button on society. It created the perfect storm of conditions: empowered workers, healthy skepticism of authority, and new technology that would go on to fuel that incredible explosion of art, science, and thought that we now call the Renaissance. It's just an incredible and tragic story. And it really shows how the consequences of our beliefs and our actions can ripple out for centuries in ways we can't even begin to predict. Which, forces us to ask a pretty tough question. What modern dominoes are we setting in motion right now?